Hopefully you can see me now. Can you? Can you? Yeah. Give us a thumbs up there if you can see me. I think there's two people on here. Someone hit thumbs up. Whatever. We'll just assume that we are live. Okay. So, like I said, I only drink like twice a month, really. And for me to drink twice a week, that like puts me in fucking pisshead league. So, thumbs up. Okay, thank you, whoever that was. Now, I'm enjoying this very much. I'm enjoying your questions. If I don't answer your questions, it's because one, I don't know, and the other one is I'll get back to you. I will answer it in time. I just don't want to make a mistake and say the wrong thing or act like I'm some kind of font of a walking encyclopedia knows everything when I don't. I only will answer what I know in the moment, but I will get back to things. And there are things I do kind of know, but I want to check up on it before I answer them. But I got some good questions here today. Today's beer is Guinness. It's an Irish theme. West Indian, well, kind of Caribbean. Porter. Now, although everyone associates Ireland with Guinness Stout as kind of like the national drink, that has only really been since the 1960s when a massive advertising campaign by Guinness to push stout took off. They would use things like bands like the big, really popular folk bands like the Dubliners at the time. They'd have albums called A Drop of the Black Stuff or A Drop of the Hard Stuff, and they'd be like in like, you know, O'Donoghue's pub in Dublin, surrounded by pints of stout. But before that, everyone in Ireland, most men drank porter. Now, porter is a kind of an ale, and it's called porter because it was drunk by porters who worked on ships or on railways, because it wasn't very strong and it went through you quickly. And water in those days was, well, when this first came out, like 200 years ago or 150 years ago, water was not always safe. So employers would actually encourage their workers to drink beer. And the beer they drank was, the porters drank was porter. And it's kind of an ale. It's actually lovely. I don't even like Guinness Stout. It's too filling and it's too heavy. So this is today's piss of choice. Okay, ales and answers 4. Okay. Oh, the smell that. That brings me right back to when I was a kid. The smell of Dublin pubs. Oh, wow. Oh, I remember the first time I drank beer was going to see Queen at 1979 at the RDS Simmons Court Arena in Dublin, and Tommy Farr, my friend, brought along bottles of, it was Smithwick's, and it was the first time I got that smell. I was about 12 or 13, and too young to be drinking, but I didn't even like it. Pretended I liked it because I was a hard man, you know how it is. Wow, that's amazing. It's true what they say about smell is like a time machine. Oh, that's beautiful. It's like a really strong red ale with the kind of Guinnessy burnt hops aftertaste. Drink this any day. The reason why it's called West Indies is because Guinness is drunk all over the world. Like for some reason, black guys love and black women love Guinness. Where you ever go, you see West Indian families in Africa. It's everywhere. Like they just love it. That's why it's so successful. Now, but as I said, porter lost its popularity when remember Guinness is popular because of massive marketing and advertising. That's the main reason it's popular. Now, first question from Mr. Lovecraft. Why did Jesus snuff it in the spring? Why was the Jesus Christ sacrifice in the spring? And wow, this is a big one. This is something that I've been thinking about for years, and I think my own theory on it is kind of because if you look at pagan concepts, I'll talk about that later in a bit. Pagan concepts of sacrifice and folklore sacrifice, and sort of like leftovers from the olden days. They took place in the autumn, which makes sense when you think about it. Approaching towards Christmas, around the time of Samhain, between Samhain and Christmas, the death of the individual who was being sacrificed represented the death of the harvest, the death of the summer, and uh, they would be reborn again in the spring. Now, uh, Fraser, in his masterpiece, The Golden Bough, writes quite amazingly on this. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But the reason why I think the Christians moved the sacrificial date of Jesus Christ to the spring was because it was just like totally take it away from paganism, make it a whole new thing all by itself. This is why they said it was the end of sacrifice. It was really the end of the traditional sacrificial season, which would be the autumnal months. Now, the thing that there's a very good book back in the 70s, I think it came out, and it was heavily referenced in Holy Blood, Holy Grail when that came out in the 90s, called The Passover Plot. Don't ask me who wrote the name. It was a typical Jewish name like Levine or Levin or something like that. He was a Jewish a scholar who wrote a very interesting thesis on the concept of Jesus Christ and Barabbas deliberately picking Passover. Now, he doesn't actually say, this is the irony of it. The actual, you know, the way they have passion plays that reenact the crucifixion, you know, the stations of the cross. Well, his theory was that the original one was actually a passion play. It was a ritual designed to give a propaganda ritual to motivate uh, people in Jerusalem, Jews in Jerusalem, to rise up or against a minor, what became a minor Roman insurgency. And the whole thing makes no sense. Why would the Romans allow this guy to be crucified on Mount Calvary, which is on Joseph of Arimathea's on family plot or whatever. And it was, why would the Romans supervise something like a Jewish funeral? This made no sense. Why would why would the Romans take such an interest in a Jewish character enacting this? It was because this mysterious individual called Barabbas, who at the same, the famous like biblical story we're told that Barabbas was released, so Jesus, give us Barabbas. So the people of Jerusalem turned on this fictional character, Jesus Christ. Now, but just because he didn't exist doesn't mean that this Passover plot didn't happen. In Catherine Nixie's The Darkening Age, she points out how around the time of Jesus Christ alleged existence, there were 30 or so other messiahs, individuals calling themselves the Messiah, the Yeshua, and they were. This was amazingly, she points out, that this was compatible with Second Temple rabbinical Judaism. That the idea that, well, we don't really know who for sure is the Messiah. If someone declares themselves the Messiah, rather than having them stoned like we did in the past, maybe they are the Messiah and let's see what happens. So what you had was a kind of a Messiah frenzy around AD, 0, BC, whatever, 0. And the concept was that eventually someone got really smart and decided to use Passover, the Jewish spring festival, in order to enact this kind of theatrical performance on the cusp of the minor Jewish revolt that was suppressed under Barabbas in Jerusalem at that time. Now, this is not a far-fetched idea, because often, if you look at the 1916 rebellion in Ireland, in Dublin, that was all kind of fired up the week before through plays that were staged around the city, and also rituals by the likes of the Golden Dawn. And this is where Yeats wrote his whole thing of a terrible beauty is born. And so this idea of a pageant, a festival reenacting the death of a Messiah would fire up the people. Now, maybe they figured out that maybe that's, and this is this guy who wrote the Passover plot. This was his contention, that some very clever Messianic Jews had a great idea of really capitalizing on the anti-Roman resentment among the poor Jews of Jerusalem. Remember, the Jewish establishment were very tied up with the Roman establishment that was controlling Judea at the time. And this idea was almost like what we'd have rebel songs today, or, song art to fire people up against for revolutionary causes, and and ironically, it became fact eventually. So, and that's why he was sacrificed, or when Christianity came along, and they took Second Temple Rabbinical Judaism and redrafted it. At things like, well, it was much later than Nicaea. We're talking about right up into the year 1000. They were still calling themselves Jews in the Vatican and places like that. Uh, you're probably talking near the Middle Ages, and they deliberately switched, just like they chose Christmas would be the date of his birth. This was also to mess with the winter, the equinox, and so on, the winter solstice of the pagan world, but also to push it all the way back to the spring to show this is very different than the traditional periods of sacrifice that exist within Indo-European paganism. So it was much a political thing as anything else. Now it gets more, when and to drive it home, there's other connections to this. Hold on. In Fraser's book, he talks about this concept called the king for a day, or the king for a week, or the king for a month, where an individual who's a peasant within the society is allowed to be the king for a month or a king for a lunar cycle. And he can have sex with the queen, he can have all the luxuries of the court, all the concubines, all the food, all the pampering, all the finery. And then when his time is up, he's ritually sacrificed in front of everyone. So the magical charge he's built up as being the king for the day is then transferred into the soil or into the culture or into the society as a noble sacrifice. And we still kind of have that today in entertainment and things like the Big Brother house and Love Island, where, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, where people vote on celebrities they hate to get rid of them and to keep the one there. That's very much playing on the temporary king archetype. Now, there was a very interesting one that took place in England called the Red Robin ritual. Probably happened right up into modern times in very rural parts of like Wiltshire, not Wiltshire, Worcestershire and Staffordshire, and these parts of like Middle England where paganism didn't really fade until very, very recently. And pagan practices such as the Red Robin were secretly what's the word, carried out while in Christian times in these remote communities without telling anybody. The Red Robin was essentially a man who was born, and his purpose was to, at a certain age, he like on in manhood, probably about 16, 17, 18, he would be killed, but he would have to impregnate a woman who would be brought in from outside, who he would impregnate her, and then her baby would become the next Red Robin. Now, the Red Robin, what was happened would be when his time was up to be sacrificed, they would cut his throat and drag him around the fields where the crops would be, you know, would be ready to be tilled for the spring. So the soil was conditioned before in the autumn. So when it came to plant the crops, his life force, like his blood and his chemicals in his body, would have fertilized the ground. So they would cut his throat, put him behind like a Shire horse or a Clydesdale horse, and drag his body around like a plough up and down along the tillage fields, and his blood would become symbolically charged. Now, there's another connection to Christianity here, and this is the idea that the bird itself, the robin redbreast, that we all lives around here, I'm sure where you live as well, that there's a folklore belief that his red on his breast comes because he landed at the feet of Christ while he was on the cross, just as the Roman soldier pierced his side with the javelin. You see, paganism, Christianity, often an arse hair between them in terms of the archetypes and things like that. So that's why they celebrate Christianity in the spring, is because they just wanted to completely take the Indo-European pagan mind and reset it like a clock, like a daylight savings time for their psyche. So that's what that's all about. I don't know. Great question here. How can necromancy ancestor worship, and reincarnation all be compatible, right? First of all, you're assuming that all these things are literally real in terms of now necromancy in recent times, mainly through movies and popular culture more than anything else, has been come to and even D&D and stuff like that to mean resurrecting the dead. Necromancy generally means communicating with the dead. So you know my feelings on this. The dead don't talk to us. When the dead when people die, they have a short period on Earth where they can be, well, as is kind of a localized consciousness, where they can be for a very short time, not even more than maybe a week, they can be contacted, and this was shown to be almost true, well true, and I write about it in my book Sorcery. In the Victorian era, when the spiritualist movies first took off, they found that only middle class and upper class spirits could read and write. The working class ones would just move the planchette or the class around in frustration, gobbledygook, and they soon found out that the working class ones couldn't read and write, and this was kind of proved life after death right and then, especially when literacy grew in the late Victorian era, early 20th century, among the working class, that they were able to read and write, and then they started to send messages back to spiritualists. Fascinating stuff, but they're only around for a week. Now, anyone who claims to be contacting someone who's dead for a long time is dealing with demons. I mean, I'm talking about like more than a week or two. And also, you see people when they've lost a loved one, and they often see the loved one. It's usually within that time frame of 2 weeks. Now, any later than that, it's dubious that you're probably either having some kind of psychiatric episode, or you're dealing with an entity. Now you're speaking to them after 2 weeks. You're definitely dealing with a demon. Remember, a demon will tell you anything they want to hear. They will lie to you. Lie, 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 and lie. But there's another side to this as well. There are people who are mediums, who are psychics, and they can actually, and I believe Derek Okora was one of these, that they could actually, using a spirit guide, can go into the mind of the person in the audience, read who they're worried about, and then tell them your Uncle Brian is here, or your Aunt Mary is here, your best friend Jim is here, your son Michael is here, because they're able to pick up the name from the person's brain. Remember, when they're deeply in that state, in that audience full of people who are seeing the medium, the psychic charge is absolutely ferociously strong, and they're upset, they're dealing with loss, they're charged up, they're desperate and their nervous system is literally exploding nuclear levels beyond their bodies. And people like Derek Okora and other mediums who just blow your mind are probably mind reading them and not actually communicating with the dead person. So that's how necromancy can be in this system. Ancestor worship. Well, what's wrong with ancestor worship in terms of reincarnation? Now, you're assuming that if reincarnation happens, they're coming back into this reality. It's now been proven beyond a shadow of doubt that we live in a multiverse. And if you read the work of, like, Anthony Peake, for instance, when you die or pass over, you could be switched alive as you are now, not knowing you're dead, into another reality where your life continues on, another multiverse where it continues on as it is. And that's probably explains why people who have died and gone into this alternate multiverse thing, that there's a sense that they're still around. I don't believe he's dead. He's probably still alive, and you're somehow getting feedback across these multiverses. So that's that's we can say there's things in terms of religion, but let's talk about in terms of what we know about quantum mechanics, quantum science, and particle physics. We do know there are multiverses. We do know there are alternate realities, and so you may die in this one, but we still live in another one. If you're reincarnated, you may come back in another version of this reality, possibly as yourself living all over again. Ancestor worship is more of a is less of a spiritual thing and more of a tribal thing. It's about the existence of the tribe, the the concept of our tribe has this, our ancestors bring us this, they carry our DNA forward. It's like a family tree brought to a very powerful and strong level, and this is the power of this. It's more of a morale boosting thing about we are these people, we have survived to get you through bad times. Like now, our ancestors, like in Ireland, our ancestors survived the War of Independence, they survived the famine, they survived the Confederacy Wars, they survived the Normans, they survived the Vikings, they survived everything. You will survive. You are when you do history of your people, you're involved in ancestor worship. You're being subconsciously reminded, we're still here. We survived. They made it, I'll make it. And that's what the ancestor worship is really about. It's less of a spiritual thing and more of a self-bonding with the tribe. So that's totally compatible. And reincarnation, again, as I said, it can be anything. We don't know, but we do know it does. It is the universally accepted construct of what happens when you die until the Abrahamic religions came along and then said there was such a thing as a heaven and you went to a heaven, which makes no sense when you think about it. No, absolutely none. Because you're an African slave. You're an African slave. You're pulled out of Africa. You're taken to the Caribbean. You're whipped and beaten by these slave owners, right? And then these slave owners on their deathbed, who whipped and beaten, raped your mother, pulled you from your home and exploited you, on their deathbed, get forgiveness from Jesus or accept the love of Allah. And then you go to your afterlife, and there's this fucker who put you through hell standing beside you because he repented. You don't think that's a bit of a bad deal there? Someone who lives their life piously within a Christian concept, does everything the Bible does. Another fella's having a great time, sex, drugs, rock and roll, gambling, womanizing. He's about to die and he goes, oh, please God, forgive me. The priest gives him an act of contrition. And then the two of them in heaven, and the fellow who's had a fantastic time on earth, hooring and drinking and drugging, is sitting there next to a fella who was like, prayed every day, did what God told them, and they're both told in heaven you're equals. Makes no sense. None. No, so that's how they're all compatible. You don't be thinking in terms of like when you die, there's an afterlife like a heaven. Think in terms of when this consciousness cycle shifts off or switches off, you go into another multiverse. You are tuned out of this reality and into another one. You're reborn as yourself. You can choose, like the Druze do, to reborn as another individual nearby, and it's fascinating, that stuff, when you look into it. And our ancestor worship is just really about a morale thing with the tribe more than a spiritual thing. And reincarnation is the standard model for life after death everywhere until the Abrahamic religions came along. Now, Maryland, that's another one. I've done videos on Maryland before, but is Maryland real? Absolutely, Maryland was real. Now, Maryland is one figure now where we can actually point to from that historical timeline. He existed, absolutely. Now, what we know mostly about Maryland in terms of the Camelot Arthurian Maryland is a result of Geoffrey of Monmouth, who wrote these sort of like Grail mysteries, these very popular stories that were basically written in French and were very, very popular in France, and they featured all stories of knights like Lancelot and Percival and Arthur, and these were the first kind of popular fiction. They would be read out in court by someone who could read, and they were great stories. And they mixed, they had like all the best stories and all the best mythology. They were a mixture of fact and fiction. But Maryland was absolutely real. Hold on. Maryland was a Welsh sort of like chieftain, or connected to a high-ranking family in Wales. Now, Wales was a different country then than it is now. Wales was basically most of Britain. The Welsh borders extended all the way up into Galloway in Scotland, right into a whole chunk of England, down towards Cornwall, which would have been independent. And then you would have had in the rest of England, you had the Anglo-Saxon states, which would have been still left over from a different Celtic thing. And so they were Brittonic, and they spoke the Welsh language was the most commonly spoken language in Britain. They were dealing with the Anglo-Saxons attacking them on one side and the Irish attacking them on the other. This is one of the things you have to laugh at when the Irish talk about, oh, we were invaded and we were attacked, we were impressed. The Irish were attacking Britain literally on an industrial level for a couple of hundred years in the second, third, and the second to fifth century. They were. That's how you think. How do you think Scotland got its name? Why do you think it's big Gaelic up there? Why are there Olm stones all over and all over Britain, the west coast of Britain? They were absolutely. How do you think this legendary St Patrick came to Ireland? The Irish were constantly attacking Britain, mainly to have a go at the Romans. They wanted to attack the Romans, and that's although Hadrian's Wall at the Scottish borders was put up to keep out the Picts, it was also put up to keep out the Irish. This is why Scotland got its name, the Scotti, and they were an Irish tribe. You had the Del Rada, which was a kind of was an Irish kingdom that extended into western Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, the Welsh were dealing with both of these threats at the time, and there was a huge battle fought up near the Scottish borders with this character called Mithrin. Now, the reason why Mithrin wasn't used in this proto-French language is because it translates as literally means a pile of shit. So he changed the name to Merlin, and Merlin sounds more. It's more sort of like flows off the Franco tongue of Merlin, where Mithrin is there to say, and it sounds like and it literally means a pile of shit. So Geoffrey of Marmor changed his name to Merlin. Now the real Merlin, Mithrin, was involved in a battle at the French borders, and it was an absolute catastrophe. Even though the Welsh, I think they won, the carnage was atrocious. He saw all his family members and his friends killed before him. And what happened was he had what we call today post-traumatic stress. And he fled into the woodlands of Scotland. And in there, he a combination of a kind of a Rambo and a Druid. And he seemed to have rediscovered Druidry and the old ways. He may have come into contact with, older folks and things like that. And he came into this paganism, almost inherent. And this is why he was referred to as a son of God, but a servant of the devil, because he kept the old pagan ways. He was a son of God, but a servant of the devil. Now, when he came out, he became almost like a court counsel. He apparently had magical powers. Apparently had great wisdom, and he became a kind of a counsel to the king, a real life Gandalf. That's really what Mithrin Merlin was. Now, when Geoffrey of Marmont wrote the Grail Mysteries and wrote his story into this, he said some things that are not true, like Merlin had levitated the stones at Stonehenge. We know from carbon dating that didn't happen, even if he could do levitation. That he levitated the stones at Stonehenge from Uisneach in the centre of Ireland and floated them from Ireland across the Irish Sea down into Wiltshire, down to the south of England. And that's a made up story, but that's, again, you mix fact with fiction and stuff like that, where who was Arthur? Was a King Offa? There's this kind of thing. There's no Arthur as such that we can find out, but there are kings of England and Wales we can definitely say, oh, he was probably based on that. And so that's Merlin. Absolutely 100% existed. His real name was Mithrin. And his story is that we know today, like all the great stories that were told back then, a mixture of fact and fiction. And so there, Merlin was real. Now the next one is The gentleman said, in the Druid Code, this is absolutely beautiful. In the Druid Code, I had mentioned that rock art, because when I wrote the Druid Code, my intention was to take what was known about, or what the general feeling about megaliths and rock art, and to add my own knowledge of magic and sorcery to it. Now, I wasn't trying to undo what amazing people like Martin Brennan and Jack Roberts did when they were, and Toby Hall, who I spoke to last week, is telling me that Martin Brennan is doing great and living in Mexico, doing fantastic. He's in his, I think he's in his 70s now, 80 nearly, and he's doing amazing work in Mexico on the rock art, in the Mayan rock art over there, still going strong. Jack is still knocking around. I see him now and again, and I'm very proud to call him a friend. And Toby, I just know from, but they were members of the Starlights group back in the 70s, and they were sleeping in megalithic passageways with rock art to observe solar and celestial alignments that the academics had not found. The most famous one, I think, was Cairn T or Cairn L, Cairn T, I think it was, at Loch Crew, where they discovered, and they got savaged by the academics who hated the idea of these, an American guy, an English guy, and an Irish guy going around and making them look really bad by doing on the ground phenomenal research in these things. Now, imagine yourself. And so I wasn't trying to, reinvent their wheel. I was adding a flavour to it. Now, you're sitting there in the Neolithic age, and you have a triple spiral or a symbol that has a particular resonance connected to a celestial object, be it a star, be it the moon, be it something like Venus. And you're sitting at the back of the chamber in complete darkness. Suddenly, a bright star or the moon or the rising sun lights through a small hole in the top of the chamber and projects a beam down the chamber, and it touches this particular graphic. What you're saying then to your people is the power of that god in the sky, be it the god that whatever they believe the names were, this is long before the Celts or anything, has now been infused into this graphic on the rock. It has charged it. We have captured the gods. The gods have kissed us. The gods have handshaked us. And therefore it was charged and infused with a magical power. You should read the Druid Code if you haven't read it. I think it's of all the books I've ever written, it's definitely my favourite. It infuses into the rock art the identity of the god represented by the star lore or the solar lore or the lunar lore, and our tribe, our people, our beliefs, our magic. So you could have, then it's a magical item. It's a talisman connected in stone. And so that's what I meant by that. The sheer force of the association the tribal has with that graphic that's been blessed by the star gods. See, and that's what that means by charging it, and then it becomes a very powerful symbol. And the proof of that is, to this day, the triple spiral from the Neolithic 5,000-year-old passage chamber at Newgrange in County Meath is a common symbol used in Celtic art and to this day. The triple spiral became the triskel, became the triquesta. It lasted, and the power of that symbol somehow echoed through our consciousness and DNA as a people, even though the what you call the Celtic and takeover. I don't even believe it was a nation. The Celtic cultural takeover, the Indo-European invasion did happen, but we still have that connection to the Proto-Europeans. The Beaker people, the ones who came, the first Europeans that built the likes of Newgrange and Stonehenge through things like the triple spiral. And that's why it was charged. And that's what I meant by that in that book. And if you haven't read the Druid Code, anyone out there, I think you'd enjoy it very much, because it was genuinely a labour of love, and I loved writing it, and I'm actually very proud of it. So that's what that means. Now, What's the next one? Can psychics be trusted? This kind of goes with the one about necromancy. Hold on. Can psychics be trusted? Well, like everything else in life, it depends on the psychic. I know people, men and women, who are intuitive psychics, rather than, shall we say, mystical psychics. Now, an intuitive psychic to me is definitely genuine because an intuitive psychic has a very strong, compassionate, and empathic connection to another human being. It's they can just read them so well, not because they're inside their head getting messages, but because they they have so much love in them and so much caring in them and so much compassion in them that they can sit down there and talk to someone. And many of them wouldn't even call themselves psychics or intuitive psychics. And they would talk to these people and they would understand them and then amazingly tell them things they didn't know because they almost, it's like two become one. It's happened to me. It's you can always tell when you're with an intuitive psychic. There's an overwhelming feeling of love, and they don't judge you. There's a wonderful, other than they may tell you they care about you or love you or something like that, but they don't go around judging you. They're not like those kind of people. And these intuitive psychics definitely are able to pick up, I'm convinced of it, on our brain waves and other things, and are able to connect in a way that's very real. So intuitive psychics, the ones who sit down and spend time with you, look and talk to you, take an interest in you, and genuinely seem very caring, are real. They're definitely real. The psychic who claims to be do it over the phone or over Skype or this, they're not real. And there's also the Skype. They don't really exist anymore. The old time psychics who are probably communicating with demons who are lying to them, and that's why they also probably came out of that. And to a sense, we're all psychic and stuff like that. So I think, yeah, a lot of it's like it goes from individual to individual. You may meet 20 psychics you meet, don't like them. Then you'll meet some kind of genuinely good person and caring person who's an intuitive psychic. And you'll just know there's just something about them. It's almost like the way a mother knows when her son or daughter has a problem. It's when two people have been close together forever, they know when the other one is not right. It works on an extremely attenuated and a strong version of that. That's what that is. And yeah, so some psychics can be trusted, especially the intuitive ones. Most, like I said, the psychic abilities are real, but not all psychics are real. And the ones that are real, they're generally intuitive psychics, and they will sit down with you and not do it over the phone, just like tarot cards. Tarot cards can actually, the thing with doing tarot cards over the internet and stuff like that, it's good for learning about the tarot, but this is one of the reasons I don't charge for tarot. I'll never charge for a tarot reading. It's a very personal thing. I'll do it up front. I'll do it with them in person, and that's the end of it. And walk away. I'll expect nothing. You want to buy me a pint afterwards or something like that, but I won't take money for it. I just couldn't do that. It's just not me. The ones who go on these psychic hotlines and do them on TV and stuff, I don't really have a problem with that because more likely than not, they're really teaching people about the tarot indirectly, and I don't think that they're doing. I know people have done those who've worked in those tarot hotlines and stuff, and they were genuinely real tarot readers, and they weren't fakes or phonies. But you really gotta be with the person. It's like pornography and making love to someone. Yeah, pornography, you can watch that. It's not the same thing as doing the business with someone for real. It's just not. Finally, the last question. Yeah, we'll take a swig with this one. Why is Abrahamic religion suited to the people of the Middle East and not the rest of us. It's not even suited to them. They Most of the people, the Semitic peoples and the people of the Middle East and the Turks and so on, they had their own pagan religion called Tenjism, and it was just like it's European pagans had similar gods and everything. The Abrahamic thing is a corruption of, well, not a corruption. Let's not call it that. It was a development of mostly Canaanite paganism. In fact, the Jews almost said, well, they did. They worshipped El and they worshipped Molech, and they especially worshipped El, and this is the golden calf. They were like so many pagans. They were involved in bovine worship. That's a whole other thing by itself, but that's very common. The cow represents the mother's milk, the birth, the fertility. This is why Ireland's earliest, stories are about the bow goddess Boand, the river Boyne, and so on. The cow goddess is central, or the bull, or bovine things, and that's always very, very central in these agrarian Indo-European societies. Something happened. I'm not going to say anything. Jinn takeover. I don't know. Something happened, and we got Judaism. Now, Judaism in by itself, when you look, okay, it's not. It's Judaism today is very different than the Judaism of 3,000 years ago. And I think the Kabbalah had a lot to do with kind of reforming Judaism. Judaism originally was very warlike, very vicious, and we see the stories of what they did to the Canaanites and the Pharisees and stuff like that. They boasted about slaughtering them, but it wasn't really them. It was this entity called Jehovah who had taken over these people, who had encouraged this and made this happen through application of the Kabbalah. Judaism became a philosophical construct as much as a theocratic one. That's the first tractor I've seen in ages. A theocratic one, and a relationship with Yahweh became more dynamic rather than sitting there in fear. The extreme Orthodox Judaism sects using the Kabbalah tempered the power of Yahweh, Jehovah. Now, what happened then was, and this is my theory alone, because Jews had been so successful in adapting, controlling the entity, the power force known as Yahweh, the Christianity came out of that. Christianity was a corruption, was of Judaism, minus the Kabbalah, and it had basically tried to use the lie of universal brotherhood. Look how many they've slaughtered ever since. Just like Islam is another one, the religion of peace. Now, and this is and I'm saying, look, if you're a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, good luck to you. I'm not putting you down. I'm just saying this is my theory regarding that element of it. My attitude is, if you're a Christian and you want to be a really devout Christian, become a Jew, because that's what you really are. If you're a Catholic, become a pagan. Or, that's one more question actually to bring it up to that. Become a pagan. Now, and the final question, this was the one I didn't write down, but it was in my head. Folk Catholicism, and it kind of segues nicely into this. I like folk Catholicism a lot. Folk Catholicism is undermine the basics. The software is Catholic. The hardware is pagan. It is pagan. Now, you go into your local store where you see, like particularly in Latino areas, and you see the candles of all the saints on them, right? Now, a lot of it, before Vatican II, it was discouraged to pray directly to saints because they were told that they were evil. Now, you might be praying to a demon. They were right. They were absolutely right. You were praying to that's why the whole thing of being obsessed with saints only really took off after Vatican II in 1967 or whatever. This hardcore thing with saints. And folk Catholicism is a basically like Santa Muerte, like the Saint Bridget cult in Ireland, like the Black Madonna, like these are kind of pagan cults functioning within Catholicism. That's why didn't surprise me when Pachamama ended up in a church in Rome. Uh, this is if I was not a pagan, I'm absolutely sure I would be a folk Catholic. I would be observing St. Bridget's Day, Easter, Stara, Christmas, Nullig as we call it here in Ireland, and Halloween, All Saints' Day, and so on, and not being a holy roller going to the Mass. So a folk Catholic could be seen as someone who now is practicing a kind of a ritualized paganism within the Catholic software. And they don't go to Mass, a lot of them. They will go to feast day Mass. They will bring their kids for communion, first Holy Communion, confirmation. They'll get married in churches. They'll baptize their babies sometimes, but generally they'll only be observant of feast days, and these feast days are all pagan in origin. And the big one, like in Ireland, there's the like Saint Bridget is a huge like folk Catholic thing here now. When I was growing up, Saint Bridget was just an important saint, but she didn't have the cult that she has today. And we used to we were shown how to make the breed cross in school. The famous cross. It's a swastika, but the Christians do it like that, right? It's done as an X. It's a swastika. It's a solar symbol. And that's why she's associated with fire and things like that. And so that's folk Catholicism, is things like applying saints, and it even gets into things like the mafia, La Costa Nostra. When you're a made man in the mafia, there's a ritual called the burning of the saints, where you get mass cards with pictures of saints on them, and you burn them in a ritual. So it's almost like you have a sanctity towards Santa Jude. You have a sanctity towards. Saint Patrick is huge in the world, not just in Ireland, English speaking countries. In Greek Orthodox, Saint Patrick is the second highest saint. He's considered the greatest evangelist that did not travel with Jesus, because he brought the Celtic pagan world and the Anglo-Saxon pagan world into Christianity, into the fold, if he existed. But that's why his church is in St. Patrick's Chapel is in Glastonbury, where King Arthur is supposed to be buried, which he isn't though. And it's full of Maryland stuff. Amazing how all the stuff ties in synchronistically to one another. And you have kind of folk Presbyterianism, believe it or not, as well. If you go to England, the Church of England, the Anglican Church, it still has it still has a lot of the Catholic stuff still in it. Harvest festivals. Look at that, the Harvest Festival, and regionalised. The Church of England was not Lutheranism. The same with the Church of Ireland. The Church of Ireland. Even here in Ireland, Free Presbyterians call the Church of Ireland, it's a Protestant church, they call them Catholic Light. That's what they call them, because they even have First Holy Communions and things like that. They celebrate communion, sorry. And so folk Catholicism is a very good thing. I think I quite like it. I like the whole idea of feast days, and I like the whole idea of even Lentons in so on, and fasting. I just think that it's folk Catholicism is Catholicism with the Vatican removed, the Pope removed, and what the Pope tells you. These would be the Catholics who are still Catholics, and they may be gay. I mean, when I was in New York, I was shocked to find out the amount of gay guys there who were like devout Catholics. And they didn't go to Mass now. But if I was started slagging off the Pope or Mother Teresa, they go, Thomas, stop that. That's not nice. The Pope is a great man. Pope John Paul's a great man. Stop, Thomas. You're going too far. I was quite taken back by that. And, but they were all like, they would be like Irish Americans and Italian Americans and Puerto Rican Americans, and they were when I think back at now, they were practiced, and come Ash Wednesday, they'd have the ash on their head, and they'd be like, these would be like hardcore queens, and they would be. Oh, they would. If you said anything about the Catholic Church, they go, Thomas, don't say that. It's terrible to say. Don't say that. And I was saying, how could you be, but I didn't get into it. They were faux Catholics. They were faux Catholics. So that's Ails and Answers number 4. And keep the questions coming. I'm enjoying this very much, and I'm going to finish off this last bottle, at the end of this bottle of Guinness Porter. I even got a little buzz off it. And take care of yourselves, and arrivederci.